Coming to you from the Oddball Podcast Studios in New York City. My name is Vin Forte, and you're listening to Oddball with Vin Forte. Go follow the show over on, YouTube. First thing, started putting up clips, full episodes, so go check that out. Go support that. YouTube.com/@Oddball Podcast. But if you just want to listen to the pod, you don't care about any visual element, go to the normal places. You know where to go. Apple, Spotify, Stitcher. Well, don't go to Stitcher. They went bankrupt over the summer. There's nothing there. Don't do Stitcher at all. Google Play? I don't know. You know where to get podcasts from. Listen, I don't need to tell you. You're listening to a podcast right now. Clearly, you know where to get them from. And we got a big show today, so I don't know why dilly-dally. We got a great person, handsome man. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there, but we got Seth Rosenthal from SB Nation and Secret Base. He's been on the pod a couple times before. This time, they've got a brand new video series out right now. All 3 parts are up on their account, on the Secret Base account, called How to Make a Basket. Basically, the story of Shaq versus Kobe during that early 2000s run and a little beyond. And I could tell you about it. Could give you a little recap, but why do that when I could just bring in Seth Rosenthal himself? Seth, how are you?
I'm great now that you called me handsome.
I mean, am I lying? I mean, now that people can see and...
Listen, I'll take it. You and my mom think so. So that's all I need. Thank you for having me, Vin. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and like I said, the big thing up on Secret Base that you've been working on that recently premiered, How to Make a Basket, Shaq versus Kobe. Obviously, there's a lot to get into. There's a lot to sort of parse out with the Shaq and Kobe dynamic. But for your purposes, what was your mission statement going into this project, or did it change? Did you go in thinking, okay, this is going to be one type of thing, and then doing some research, you're like, no, we need to turn this into something a little different?
That's a good question, because the answer is yes. I mean, if people are familiar with Secret Base, they know that we have a series called Beef History, which is quite simply these 2 athletes or coaches or whatever didn't like each other. Here's the story of that. It's usually 10 or 15, maybe 20 minutes. It's in general pretty lighthearted because sports beef is generally pretty stupid. And we try to tell the story like it was, but it's lighthearted. There's a little bit of mockery in there because often these things are caked with sort of stupid masculine energy and
well, the Shaq one, you've done a couple on Shaq before. He's no stranger to
yes, and history. So Shaq has been in several beef histories, and
they're all stupid.
They are basically all stupid, and they're sort of intentional. Shaq has fun and motivates himself as when he was a player by picking on other centers and developing rivalries out of thin air, and just it was fun to him. He seems sort of like he would have been a pro wrestler if he wasn't an NBA player, and he liked to sort of invent conflict, in part for the real reason that it seemed to motivate him. So that being the case, for the whole time we've done that series, which is 5 or 6 years now, over 100 episodes, I think, people have said, when are you going to do Kobe and Shaq? And my answer has always been that what you need more time to do that one. I will do that Shaq Kobe beef when someone lets me make a movie about it. We've had plans to do it before. Kobe Bryant passing away in 2020 certainly delayed any willingness to talk about a nasty part of his life and career. Wouldn't have been tasteful. I was going to do it last year, but then I went on parental leave. When I got back this year, it was finally time to do the Shaq and Kobe beef. Our executive producer, Will, said, make it a movie. You have several months and, many thousands of words in which to tell this story. And so I sat down to do the Shaq and Kobe beef. And the immediate things I pulled away were, one, this can't be a beef history. well, just one. The immediate thing I pulled away was this can't be a beef history, so to speak. So that meant I wasn't prepared or comfortable to do it with that sort of lightheaded, lighthearted, lighthearted, joshing sensibility that we usually do with beef history. There's plenty of stupid stuff in the Shaq and Kobe beef.
Oh,
It is,
but there's a lot of whiplash too. Like on one hand, Shaq will get asked questions about Kobe and the press, and he'll start meowing like a cat, which is
yes,
ridiculous. But that is in the wake of Kobe Bryant saying, "Hey, well, I should just do what Shaq does and pay off his women," which is a very
yes,
serious
in the
thing.
course of a police interrogation about an alleged sexual assault. So, and the man has died, and Shaq is clearly in the years that have passed, and in public, just in deep mourning. Has at times really not been doing well when it comes to Kobe publicly. And so I am not in the business of speaking ill of the dead or making Shaq feel bad. We're not here to, that's just not my job. I'm not, going to uncover the truth no matter whose feelings it hurts. This is entertainment, and I wanted to do it appropriately and respectfully.
Well, that's a great point because I remember even when Kobe, like right after he died, there was always going to be that section of people that were like, well, we shouldn't be celebrating him because, he had that thing in Colorado. And it's like, listen, everyone can feel however they want to feel about that. But the fact remains, he died in a horrible way with people he loved. And in the intervening years, it seemed like he became a different person or a better person. So, you have to take the totality of someone's life, once they've hit that point of, okay, they're gone. They're never coming back. They can't answer for anything that you want to ask them or feel about them. And again, you could feel however you want about Kobe, but at a certain point, it's like he's not here to answer for anything anymore. So you do have to tread a little lightly on that respect.
Yes, and I think I agree with most of that, and I think all that was on my mind is for reference here. Shaq often watches beef history if it's about him, and often tweets about it, and so like I'm not gonna make something where if Shaq sees it, I am worried that
You don't want to anger Shaq.
I'm worried that I'm offended him with my tone. If I tell the truth and just report what happened and
Right.
go to the data, that is what it is. But I want to do it evenly and fairly and with an appropriate tone. And beef history is just not that. It's sillier than that. And so we stepped back from that, sort of, and that means the visuals are different, the music is different, the style of storytelling is different. And I think the other thing I realized very early on that contributed to that decision was that it was it was a beef, and it got nasty, it got personal. But as I say very early on in the piece, this is a very sort of clinical workplace disagreement. Their fundamental problem was they had basically opposite approaches to how to practice and how to play basketball, partly because they're they're just different shapes and come from different places and have different backgrounds, but they arrived at being great basketball players with totally different styles. And they disagreed about who is, it's sort of an org chart thing. They disagreed about who should be in charge of playing the basketball and how it should be done, as a matter of that. And so to treat it like something that was fiery and like passionate and intense and beefy, and whether that's serious or in mockery, didn't seem appropriate either. This was very it was super simple for a lot of it, and really strategic. It was really a workplace thing. And so that is why this started as a beef history movie and became definitely still very much a feature length thing, but and just very much the history of a beef, but not in keeping with the way we traditionally approach those stories, because it's different and it's
And
bigger.
and as you just kind of alluded to, I found myself watching it going, they both kind of have good points at different times. Like at different points, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, Shaq is, yeah, he's right. He's right about this. But then 2 minutes later, I'm like, yeah, well, Kobe's making some good points too. Like there's a whole back and like one of the main back and forths in the piece is about how Shaq is dominant and feels I only need to play one way because it's gotten me this far. I've won multiple championships. I've won multiple Finals MVPs. Why would Shaq want to change what he's doing when what he's doing is working so well? But then to Kobe's point, it's like, yeah, but then you come into practice out of shape. You know, you could be doing more. We could be winning more. But again, the pendulum then swings back to Shaq. But we're winning. Like, so I kind of felt myself going a lot, back and forth a lot with their sort of yin and yang ping ponging.
Yes. Both admitted to each other's faces after their careers ended that they were cruel and childish to one another. And I think what you're getting at is that that stems from them taking pride, and there's a lot of pride like baked into this story, them each taking pride in achieving greatness, again, through almost opposite perspectives. So, like you were saying, it was very important to Shaq for him to feel proud and cool and dominant to sort of beat you with one hand behind his back. He has said basically, like, I can beat you without getting good at free throws, without being in perfect shape, without training in the off season, without spending all night in the gym. And that's cooler. That's so cool that I can do that. And obviously Shaq has, as basketball players go, was blessed with being 7 feet with incredible reflexes and incredibly strong and with a soft touch. Like, and his point was, my natural gifts are so great that I can beat you without sharpening them. Kobe, who was very naturally gifted himself, took pride in doing the opposite, in just polishing and polishing and polishing and polishing and studying constantly. I mean, this is, the stuff of legend. People have been talking about this for years, since, he started to win championships by himself. Like, his obsession with greatness and his refinement and his practice. Every player that has ever crossed paths with him has a story about running into him at the hotel gym at 5:00 in the morning. And Kobe liked that. That's what made him feel proud. That was the flavor of success he wanted to broadcast. And I don't, I'm not a great athlete. I don't have an opinion about which of the other is correct. They were both correct in one respect, which is that they won. They were great. They're Hall of Famers. But like, obviously that's not going to work when you're on the same team together. And particularly in Shaq's case, depend on the other player to succeed. And that's part of it too, is dependence. As Shaq was a traditional 5, he wasn't going to bring the ball up and do everything himself. He needed someone to set him up. Kobe was like, I could be out there by myself and I could win us games. And so, that again, that strategic distinction and strategic disagreement was at the foundation of stuff that got way gnarlier than something you could draw on paper.
Well, and again, to your point, Shaq, saying he's not a traditional center, would constantly throw guys like Luke Longley and Bill Cartwright under the bus, which I found to be kind of hilarious. Like, oh, I need to throw Luke. Like, you didn't need to say anyone, but you're just gonna throw Luke Longley out there. And to your point again, or rather, let me reframe this for a second, because Shaq very much is a guy who likes having a mythology about himself, likes seeing himself as larger than life, like you said, multiple times now, especially in the piece itself, Shaq likes to make up stories to feed his ego, to feed the legend of Shaquille O'Neal.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you can get the sense that, okay, well, Kobe, sort of the opposite of that. But I think Kobe was just more quiet about it, because as you saw with, after the 04-05 season, after it was officially his team, people forget that's when the Mamba mentality stuff started to happen. Like the Black Mamba stuff, wasn't that, and you mentioned it in the video, it was like a marketing campaign. Like it came out from Nike, I think. So, it's all marketing, and I think as much as Kobe might not have let on, I think just as much as Shaq, he's very into his image and forming the mythology of Kobe Bryant. Again, the stories, people finding him in the gym at 2 a.m. shooting 2,000 shots, a day in the off season. Like he's more quiet about it, he's more subdued. But I think he's right up there with Shaq in terms of wanting that mythology.
My read of that is that the Black Mama campaign that you mentioned represents sort of a pivot for him, because I agree, like before, while they were winning championships together, Kobe definitely built himself a mythology, but instead of, Shaq would tell all manner of stories and answer every question he was asked and just say whatever, and so anything could be true about Shaq. Kobe kept to himself and spurned reporters, and only spoke very calculated sentences, and then just sort of retreated to the shadows and practiced. But you would see him doing this stuff, and he would just sort of, he liked to be a shadowy, quiet figure, and then because of that, you could believe or not believe anything you heard about him. That's another way to achieve mythology, is to be great, be quiet, hide a little bit, and let people tell stories about you. 2004 was the year he was awaiting trial for sexual assault, and it's, I think, not a coincidence. It's been written about that it's not a coincidence that when his reputation was sullied, when he became to the public a manner of villain, and when basically all of his sponsors, either waffled or dropped him, except for Nike, he and Nike sat down and said, the right thing to do here is to create an alternate persona and market you under this alternate persona, and have that alternate persona now make explicit the individuality, the tendency to hide, the tendency to move in the shadows and be this sort of like silent killer. They leaned into the existing mythology that he sort of let happen and wanted to happen. And they even borrowed from the fact that he was perceived as a villain. And I don't know how that would look now if he then didn't go on and win a bunch more, but he did. And so now it's all sort of baked together in, yeah, that Kobe legacy of the Mamba mentality of hiding from the public. And when everyone else has having fun, you're just working on your game. It really has taken on a lot of different forms over the years. And, we were talking about earlier in this conversation about after Kobe's death, trying to come up with a way to just represent his legacy. That was not my job in this piece. This is about their relationship. I would not want that job. That is, I could not blame or begrudge any person who would dismiss his entire career because he was credibly accused of sexual assault. Couldn't blame you for that.
Right.
And certainly plenty of people are willing to do the opposite. But it is very clear to me that a mythology that was, I think for a time built on the fact that he wouldn't talk, after that point became something that he and Nike put together on purpose and built a brand around. And it's, I mean, someone smarter and better informed and better connected than I do. There's a good Washington Post piece about it, but someone I think is that, that needs to be studied, because it's a very calculated, very objectively just successful way to market someone who was accused of doing something horrible.
Well, yeah, and in that respect, very risky, but I was even going to take it in a different direction where risky in the sense that had he gone on to do absolutely nothing and fall off a cliff, what a terrible campaign that would have been. Like, oh, we're backing this guy who, like we already mentioned, had these very serious issues, at the very credible issues at the time, and now, like, for lack of a better way of putting it, because I can't think of the words right now that guy doesn't even get a quote unquote redemption. Like, what a weird campaign that would have been.
And that's if you think about, remember the commercials, like at the end of Kobe's career, or even the Black Mama campaigns itself. It's like it almost wasn't about redemption. It was,
It was like, I'm
him,
here, deal with me now.
yes,
Like,
me being obsessive, me being cruel or lonesome, or, whichever direction you want to take it. But these sort of possibly negative terms are what makes me great. And the Black Mama being a snake as your logo is, there's something to that.
yeah,
And the commercials when he retired, where it was like Phil and Paul Pierce singing about how they hate him, that's pretty unique to Kobe. Uh,
well, you bring up Phil, and one of the big pieces, I think the third video is, you mentioned this book, The
yeah,
Last Season, which
got my
I
copy
was in
from
which I was in high school when this came out, and I remember it coming out. And sometimes in the moment, when you're a little younger, you don't realize how crazy something is. And years later, I looked back on this book, and I was like, this is insane.
Yes.
This is like absolutely insane. But it's also not unprecedented, because Phil Jackson did a similar thing with the Bulls last season, where he had like a running diary on like ESPN.com or something. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so this is not, one, it's insane, and two, it's not even new for this guy. And he's spilling all I remember he was on, like, all the talk shows, like talking up this book, people asking him about Kobe and his relationship with him. And it's like, this is wild that he put this out and then came back like 2 years later. Like, how insane is this?
Quite. Yes. I mean, part of the reason, first of all, it's given, I guess, but part of the reason Shaq and Kobe won, especially the first championship, was that Phil Jackson got
Right.
something right. I don't want to dismiss him entirely, but I'm about to talk a ton of shit about Phil Jackson. Uh, what a messy individual. Part of the reason this happened, Shaq and Kobe having a feud with each other, is that he played favorites. He was messy. He leaked to the media. He talked behind their backs. He was an incredibly dramatic and sort of toxic figure. And like, I mean, Vin, you mentioned the Bulls. I'm a Knicks fan. Phil Jackson was doing this stuff with the Knicks also,
Yeah.
and no one cares because the team sucked and weren't interesting. But like,
Right.
he didn't write a book about it because it wouldn't sell. But while he was running the team, yeah, he
There was
and
the stuff with
Charlie
I mean, I guess
Rosen.
the big thing was the Carmelo and the Thugs, that thing.
Yeah, Phil Jackson has revealed himself in his years after being part of the NBA as
A more
beyond being
mixed figure.
messy, someone who has some pretty racist opinions, someone who's pretty backward in their thinking about all kinds of stuff, but someone who won enough, either, through some combination of good fortune and good tactics, and I guess good personality management, won enough that didn't sort of win the day narratively for a while. But yes, keeping a diary of this incredibly hectic season, publishing that diary, which is full of incredibly candid stuff about two guys, one who was going through a difficult season and a contract negotiation that fell apart and all that, the other who was going through the same thing and then also a sexual assault scandal, publishing that book right afterward and then coming back and coaching the latter to two championships is unheard of. Is crazy. And part of the reason that Kobe and Shaq's dirty laundry is out there, part of the reason I know enough from reading to tell this story in a 80-minute video, is that Phil just blabbed about it constantly. He was doing it while it was happening, and he did it in two books written about the Lakers sort of at the beginning and end of his stint with them. Nobody else does that. Nobody else gets away with that. But again, a lot like with Kobe, you get to be sort of a complicated, charismatic kind of villain if
Right.
you just
Oh,
win. If you just
I'm
win.
the Zen master.
Yes,
Like,
if all Phil ever did was be an asshole and lose, then he would be an asshole. But he was an asshole who won, so he's something else.
yeah. How did that even come about? That he was able, like, how did him and Kobe like patch that relationship up? Because I think a lot of people, they focus on a lot of the drama beforehand, then they focus on the winning that happened after when they got back together. But what did it really take for them to get back together? Like, has that
That's
story
a
ever
good
really come
question.
out?
I don't know. I mean, that was not part of my research for this piece
Right.
because that's, absent, that's separate from Kobe's relationship with Shaq. But Phil, the last season, the book pictured here, by the end of that book, it is, in Phil's diary, which runs into '04, maybe '05. He says, like, yeah, I mean, me and Kobe weren't going to both stay on the team. He basically accuses Kobe, I think, fairly, of driving him out of town. Um, but he also indicates, and I don't know that Kobe would have agreed with this. I mean, they did get back together, but he also indicates that the strife between them early in that '03-'04 season did somewhat get talked through. So, like, there was a point where, where Phil was thinking of basically putting Kobe on administrative leave, of just, you know, kicking him out of the locker room until he had figured out his court case. He would sit down with Shaq and Rick Fox and say, like, do you think we can win a championship with this guy? Like,
Right.
that's pretty petty. And also he documents private conversations he had with Jeannie Buss where he was like, I'm sick of Kobe. I don't want to work with him anymore. I might quit right now. And Kobe certainly was nasty to him, to his face. But they were on sort of not amicable, but civil speaking terms by the end of that season. And I think the conversations, as Phil describes them, that led Phil to be like, this isn't happening. I'm going to retire and lay low for a little bit. Were sort of healthier man-to-man conversations
Right.
than the ones that preceded them.
But even the idea of, okay, so they ended up in an amicable place, amicable, and then, hey, I'm gonna release this book anyway. And like, do you give them a heads up when you're releasing a book like this? Like, what do you like?
That's
That's
a great question.
like
And
again, like like you can say you guys made up, but then, like, if I'm your friend, I'm not releasing this book if we're even on amicable terms.
yeah, and again, this is a matter of things look and feel very different if you don't win. And I think,
Yeah.
well, I don't think, it's a matter of fact that between '04 and what are we talking about, '07,
Yeah.
Kobe didn't do a lot of winning, and the Lakers went through different coaches. And I'm sure Kobe said, well, listen, it worked last time. I need to win more. He wasn't going to bring back, a superstar who was quite on his level the way Shaq was, at least fame wise. But Phil, maybe they can make it work. I bet. Yeah, I don't feel as steeped in that history as I do in the stuff pre '04.
Yeah. And then sort of the addendum to all of it is, you mentioned in the final video this moment in, I believe, '09,
Mm-hmm.
when they were both the All-Star game playing for one night only back on the West. Which, complete aside, thank you, Joe Dumars, for bringing back the good All-Star game this season,
Mm.
that we're going to finally get East versus West again instead of
Yeah.
this weird schoolyard. I'm gonna pick you on my no.
Yeah.
I want the stars from the West and the stars from the East, because when you have that, to bring it back around, you can get a moment like this every once in a while where we didn't think these two would ever be back together,
To be
and now
fair,
for one night only.
an all-star draft with both of these people involved would have been would have been pretty interesting. But yeah,
It would have been.
at any year before that, if there were an all-star draft in 2005, for instance, they could have ended up on the same team. Anyway,
That's true, but I'm gonna go with this
I like it better
version.
too. Yeah, me
Yeah,
too.
because we've seen the All-Star drafts, and oof. But yeah, going back to this moment, it seemed like they had really, even if they didn't say anything beforehand, just they both had this sort of recognition about each other, where it's like, hey, listen, like, it's been a couple years now. We know we both have egos. Like, we both did a lot of winning. Let's not spoil the good times. Even though, like we mentioned before, there were a lot of really serious accusations thrown each other's way, and big blowups and fights as well. But I think this is one of the ultimate cases of like maybe time does heal all wounds, and maybe to a certain extent, all their bluster against each other was just that going back to your original thesis of the whole video series. This was a very clinical, traditional work beef.
Yeah. It's certainly not the case that the beef that they had while they worked together stopped when they stopped working together. They were still talking about it. They were still very competitive about who had more rings
Right.
than the other one. And this is an I will get to this, but this is an interesting moment in time with that in mind. But yeah, they didn't have new problems really with each other after 2004. And people tried to encourage them to have new problems. The media was all
Mm.
over their first matchup was Christmas '04, and every time they played each other, the media would be like, and it became a laughing matter at that point. And I think for Kobe decided to drop it as soon as they broke up. Kobe was done talking shit about Shaq. I mean, they didn't play together, so Kobe didn't care anymore. It didn't
Right.
matter that Shaq wasn't in shape in Kobe's eyes, or that Shaq was self or whatever. It didn't
No,
matter to
they're getting
Kobe.
to do things their way, and
Kobe
that's
didn't
all
care
they ever
about it
wanted.
anymore. And it had become public in, I think, September of '04, that in the course of a police interrogation, like we mentioned earlier, Kobe sort of offhandedly said, "Oh, Shaq, pays women to stay quiet about their affairs." And that made him look extra, extra bad. And so I think at that point he was like, I am not going to continue this conflict. I am going to apologize. And he, I think, did. So that was '04. The picture we're looking at, their All-Star game together, interestingly, is February 2009. So yes, time had passed, but what I find fascinating about this is that Kobe hadn't won any more championships yet. He had been to the finals in '08, but he hadn't won. He was about to win
Right.
number 4 and then number 5, and in fact surpass Shaq in the ring ledger, but he hadn't done that yet. And so uh them getting along, there's a conversation they supposedly had where they shared the MVP honors, but Kobe said, you take the trophy, bring it home to your son Sharif. That meant a lot to Shaq. And Kobe was saying all this stuff from a point of having one fewer ring than Shaq did, and having not yet won anything without Shaq. Um, which is fascinating. That puts an interesting perspective on, you know, this moment in time, because like you said, 10 years later, when they sat down and sort of publicly made up and did that TNT players only thing together, Shaq identified this moment as like, this is when I realized that I needed to drop the beef. This is when I fully became clear to me that he says I had been an asshole to you in the past.
Do you think that Shaq is the kind of guy? I always get the sense that he's a guy that wears his heart right on his sleeve. That I I see a lot of clips of him, and it seems like he's, on one hand, he's a guy who just loves to have fun, embraces the fact that he's a big celebrity. You always see him doing these like small acts of charity where he'll be at a car dealership and he'll be like, "Hey, you want that car?" And he'll just buy a random person a car. And it's like, I think he revels in that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, I think if he feels slighted by you in any way, he will be the pettiest person in the world. And we've seen this with Beast with him and David Robinson, Dwight Howard, Kobe. Um, on the flip side of that, though, I think I take Shaq 100% at his word that maybe this moment here, where he said, give the trophy to your son Sharif," that unlocked something in him where it was like, oh, like this guy has changed. I need to change. Whatever I'm still holding in me, I need to change that as well. Whatever beef there was, like this, it ends today.
I, yeah, and I don't think Shaq likes attention. That much is obvious.
Right.
And the way he went about getting attention was usually by messing around, by joking, often about serious stuff, often about stuff that actually mattered to him, but he messed around. And between their breakup and this moment at the All-Star game, he kept messing around about the beef. He kept, saying little like subtle things. He kept making jokes. He just referenced it. He made it a pop culture thing. He did the famous freestyle rap. And so it's not like he was, deliberately inflaming his feud with Kobe by taking direct angry shots. He just kept messing around in a way that Kobe never did and certainly wasn't at this point. And that more or less stopped. I think he was actually angry and said stuff that reflected anger during the period of time they were playing together, where he stopped messing around and said things that were not meant to be taken as jokes. Because, like you said, he wears his heart on his sleeve. After that point, yeah, Kobe's style of play and practice was not relevant to Shaq's, and so to the extent that the beef kept going, it was a joke, it was a meme, but it was only Shaq putting that forward.
And then, then we get to sort of the final chapter. At the very end of the video, you mentioned that players only interview. I think that's one of those interviews that or those, pieces of media that in the moment, nobody realized how important that conversation between them would be, because that's an interview that it was certainly big, like, oh, Shaq and Kobe getting together to talk about their career. Like, that's a big moment. But in the intervening years, we see clips of that interview all the time. Like, that interview is held up in like pretty high regard in terms of them sort of putting a cap on their legacy. Um, how important was that, especially in the wake of Kobe, unfortunately, passing away and so tragically? Like, that feels like a piece of media that we all, as basketball fans, kind of hold on to as the finale of their relationship, where we almost don't even want to think of what happened to Kobe afterwards. Like, this interview with the two of them, that's like the capstone on their career.
Yeah, I think in that light, it's pretty important. Real closure, real resolution, real conversation happens in private. And I assume that's true of these public figures the way it is about anyone. But they are public figures, and this was their sort of official public resolution. They got together and they laughed about everything. I don't want to make it out to be some like super important, comprehensive piece of journalism. They
No, no.
deliberately leave a lot of stuff out and sort of, and that's part of the reason I did this piece is like I watched that and I was like, man, they're laughing about it now, but this sounds like it must have been pretty intense at the time. Or, they just skipped over something pretty major or whatever. And
Right, they'll be like, "Oh man, we said a lot of BS about each other." And it's like, what was that BS?
yeah, it's there's BS and then there's BS. But yes, I think especially for Shaq, who has mourned in public and obviously continues to be a public figure, I don't. It is clear because Shaq has said as much that his relationship with Kobe and Kobe's death haunt him and will haunt him for a long time. But at least there is this. At least that is what it is. It is at least there is this. We have this very clear, very convincing document of their resolution. Let there be no mistake that they made up, that they were friends by the end. And it was supposed to be the case that they would be friends for a much longer end and decades more of friendship, and that would have been much nicer, and Shaq will never get that. But at least there was this. And so yes, I think Kobe went on Shaq's podcast too. They've done a couple media things in that period of time of like 2017 to 2019. And those are important vis-a-vis this relationship. Even if they don't, they're not there to tell the whole story, and they don't. But they're important because this needed resolution, and I think they accomplished that.
And lastly, now I'll let you go. I don't want to hold you too long. In doing all of your research for this project, is there anything that you uncovered that you feel like there's a big misconception out there between these two, where you were like, oh, this really wasn't the case. It really wasn't how people usually make it out to be.
What they would tell you is we didn't. Well, what Shaq still says all the time is we didn't hate each other. It was just basketball, which I don't. It started with basketball, and people are threatening to kill each other and hitting each other and screaming at each other. Maybe that's not hate, but it's something. Misconceptions besides the one Shaq would say is the biggest misconception. Like this is one of the best documented stories in recent sports history. To the extent that there are still public misconceptions, it's for lack of reading. I got a fucking stack of books next to me about this. Like part of what made this hard is that they have been
there's almost too much information.
So much. There is too much information about it. A lot of it, there's a lot of conflicting information.
Well, like you mentioned in the piece, everyone had their go-to guy. Like Kobe had Jim Gray. Phil Jackson was writing his own books. Shaq had his people that he would go to, and at a certain point, a lot of people like to throw, oh, fake news, fake news, fake news, when people sort of have their own go-to guy. But it's like, that is just how journalism works sometimes. Is sometimes you're the guy that gets the exclusives, and you hope that the guy that gets the exclusives, like a Jim Gray, is just someone who is going to tell it like it is and not be a complete, homer for the person he's writing about. But with that said, the fact remains that each person had their own go-to, and that's going to create some conflict.
Yeah. I mean, beyond that, there's just like sports books are just riddled with, I'm not talking about like the reporting and talking to people, just like the sports information. You'll go read a book and it'll be like, this game on March whatever, this was the score, and then you go look up at the game, it's like, no, it wasn't. None of this didn't happen the way you said it did. And the fight earlier in their career, they physically fought one another during the lockout. Like that's been put into many newspapers and several different books, and the story changes a little bit each time. And having to parse all of that approaching this was difficult too. But misconceptions, a good question. The only thing that has come to mind since you asked that question is like, I don't think it's unfair to call Kobe Bryant a ball hog in like his 03-04 season.
Right.
Maybe no, really in the 03-04 season. Before that, he maybe was a ball hog at times because Shaq really wasn't ready to play basketball in 02-03, for instance. But in periods of time before that, like I went back and watched a lot of games. I read a lot. I looked at a lot of stats, and like Kobe liked to shoot and he was good at it. But Kobe moved the ball. Like Kobe really like didn't deserve to be called a ball hog, except for like, some outings here and there through, I would say at least the first two championships. And I think part of the reason he got the ball hog reputation is just that he wasn't nice to his teammates. And so like teammates resented him and he shot the ball a lot. So it was like, oh, well, it's probably the fact that he's not playing in the offense. But like I don't know, he moved the ball. and those first couple.
I'm gonna get upset with him for not shooting out to Ty Lue all the time. Like, what are we talking?
Yeah, and he was getting his assists. He was working the ball to Shaq down low. Like it took him a few years and a few successful years before he fully put the pedal to the metal and was like, Shaq doesn't deserve to be the first option. It's going to be me.
Well, I think probably what also clouds that is when that time he actively refused to shoot.
Yeah, which is much later.
To make a point. Which was much later.
Post Shaq Kobe, whole different animal.
That's a whole different book. That's a whole different series.
Yeah.
But like I said, I'm not gonna keep you all day. Uh, Seth, thank you for taking some time out. Let people know where they can find you and Secret Base and all the videos that you've done. You've got no shortage of videos from beef
We
histories
got a
to
lot of videos.
prisms. There's a
Yeah,
lot. There's a lot to check out.
Secret Base on YouTube is where you can find everything I make. It'll be a long time before I make a 85 or whatever minute documentary, but there's plenty of other good shorter stuff too.
Yeah, so check that out. And yeah, do you have any? Uh, Again, not 80 minutes, but any good topics that you're working on coming up?
Yeah, you know what? I mean, I don't think anyone cares if I spoil something. I've been writing all week and last week a little bit about Rex Chapman.
Oh,
And this is one of my favorite things I've worked on in a long. We have a series Prism, which is like, this person for this, but what about all this stuff? And Rex Chapman, I think to especially people who are a little younger or people who just don't follow sports, is the Twitter guy, is the guy who does blocker charge on Twitter and posts viral videos of animals and stuff. And he has like a TV show and a podcast, and he's just like an influencer. He's a social media personality. But when I was a kid, Rex Chapman was a very interesting, quite good basketball player who has a very, very complicated, very interesting career, as well as a period of addiction and recovery in his life. Um, but basically, I wrote a piece about how, like, dude had a lot going on in college, had a lot going on in the NBA, was part of some really important moments and trends. And I don't think it tells the whole story to be like, this guy got arrested 10 years ago and now he tweets videos of puppies and his life has turned around. I think that's a happy story, but it's not the whole story. And so
no.
there will be a Prism episode about Rex Chapman in the near future. So there you go.
And I have one last question
Yeah.
that's very secret base related. There was a series that you guys did about like a year or two ago that I really enjoyed, but I guess no one else did because you guys stopped making videos on it. Where it would be like the overlap of two people's
Yeah.
career, where it's like, oh, Penny Hardaway was said to be the new Magic Johnson,
Yeah.
and like have them overlap. And I feel like that became Prism, kind of.
Not quite. I mean, there's certainly some overlap there. Yeah, overlap was fun. I liked doing it. I don't know why. There's a few series that we don't really do these days. That either because sometimes it's because just we didn't get the engagement, the
Yeah.
attention that we were hoping for. Um, but that also interacts with some things require a different level of just workload and investment. Like we used to do a series High Score that I loved doing, but it was
Mm.
like required two animators, 2 weeks, and like we are a very, very stripped down team. We have gone through several rounds of layoffs.
Yeah.
We are all worked to the bone. And so we have to be efficient. And if we spend a lot of time working on something and not enough people watch it, we got to bail. And so I
Yeah.
guess I don't know if it's been formally said, but I think overlap falls into both of those categories where it just wasn't worth the effort, which is a bummer because that was fun and we had more stories to tell there. So maybe someday.
Maybe.
If you can find me like a
So
million people to watch that, then I'll do it.
well, again, it's not like there's any shortage of
Not up to me.
videos. Yeah, yeah, it's not above your purview.
Yeah.
But Seth, thank you for taking some time out. Yeah, like I said, go check out SB Nation, Secret Base. There's no shortage of videos and beef histories and rewinders to go watch over there. So I'm gonna kick you out for a second while I go ahead and just do an outro. There we go. So like I said, go check Seth out over at SB Nation. How to Make a Basket, Shaq vs. Kobe is the video series. It's only 3 videos long. It's 80 minutes, but come on, it's doable. I know people are watching, 4-hour retrospectives on the history of Fraser Crane or whatever. Like people are people are watching weird stuff on YouTube. So go watch something of great quality. And with that said, go follow the pod over on first YouTube if you're listening to this. Like I said, that's the big thing I'm pushing right now, putting segments, full clips, full episodes up on YouTube, youtube.com/at Oddball Podcast, youtube.com/at Oddball Podcast. If you want to just listen to the pod and you're watching it, go listen over on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. You know where to get your podcasts from because you're listening to one right now. With that said, see you back here same time, same place. Next week, every Friday, you'll be listening to Oddball with Vin Forte. My name is Vin Forte. Bye-bye.